for him.
1, 2, 3. Welcome back to the Gnostic Warrior. How you doing today, Miguel?
Great, nice to be back again with you, Mo. And it was the first time, and now it's great to be the second time with you.
Definitely, and I think we share a lot of ideas and things in common. You're the Solar Warrior. I'm the Gnostic Warrior. Tell us a little bit about your concept of the Solar Warrior and what the warrior means and the warrior tradition means to you.
Yeah, the warrior, as we all know, it's all about fighting, to simplify. But the great issue is, for what reason? What's the motive for fighting? It's just for fighting for our ego, or something that transcends the image that we've created of ourselves, or that society wants us to fulfill for the agenda of society. So the thing is, the issues is fighting, but the thing is, which is the goal? The solar goal, the central goal, which is that of transcending the ego and ascending to a knowledge that we participate in creating, and that can serve for the whole creation of, let's say, not only humanity but all living beings, and participate in that process. And so that's it, fighting for a cause, but the cause has to be something that is transcendent. So I would summarize it that way.
That's great. And let's talk about these ideas and this knowledge that transcends time. To me, this deals with the tradition of ideas and philosophy that goes back, of course, to the recorded history, back to ancient Greece and the first people to call themselves philosophers and live lives of philosophers, from Plato and so forth. So what are your thoughts in regards to these traditions and these ideas, as opposed to possibly what is happening today, where people, they want to throw those ideas away? They don't mean nothing. Let's just forge our new identities and our new ideas that aren't based on these ideas that transcend hundreds, thousands of years in many cultures.
Well, I would say that today we could have access to academic approach to philosophy in many universities, but that would not guarantee any of us to read between the lines, to really digest, to assimilate what the Greeks, what the Romans wrote in their texts, because we lack what is generally considered in many traditions the esoteric aspect of our personal experience, which allows us to read between the lines. So in that sense, I think that, yes, to approach the Greek culture or Roman culture is great, but there are so many others in the Western tradition that could be, at the end, we could easily find matching points between all of them. The idea that they point to is always the same, just in different contexts, or cultural, economic, sociological, and political contexts. But the idea they point to is always the same. But where's the starting point? Ourselves. That's what we're missing today, I think. If we want to read between the lines of the great philosophers, let's say Socrates, Plato, even Nietzsche and others, we need to give a little bit of time to ourselves and experience pain, pleasure. I think that's my view of things, and that's the warrior has to specifically, let's say, the warrior archetype has to not be afraid of pain, because pain is an experience that allows to see one's barriers. And that's very good for understanding the limits of our ego. So we can then transcend that to something else.
Definitely. What's that sound in the background?
Oh, wait a minute. Can I?
Yeah, sure.
It's just the wind. I'll close the wind, okay?
Okay, all right. That's really loud, okay.
Yeah. It was a dog. It was out there, so a dog. Sorry for that.
Yeah, and in regards to these traditions, these ideas, something that comes up often, we're men, right? And we grew up maybe in different countries and so forth, but there's usually the concept of the traditional type of man versus today what we have more of a liberal type of man. And you've written several, articles and posts, and you have the books that you've written as well. What is your idea in regards to the Western traditional man to the man of today?
To summarize it very briefly, they live in very different conditions. I would say that, for example, the traditional man and woman have to face real challenges in their everyday life. But today's context, both for men and women, is that they have to challenge ghosts that emerge in their mind as a consequence that they're living in a world that is mediated by TV, by all sort of stereotypes that appear to be like what we have to follow to fulfill our archetype either of man or woman stereotypes. So I think that's the key point that changed, that it's not about today, it's all about feeling the ego of what a man and a woman ought to be, in the sense that we all have to fulfill our highest goal. But the thing is that there were situations in the past that people didn't have time for this mediation and say, look, if I don't act as a man and the woman, if she didn't act as a woman, they simply wouldn't survive. Yeah, so that's the difference. That's the key difference. Today, it's not about survival. Today, mostly in general, all our survival conditions are pretty much fulfilled in terms of food and everything else and basic subsistence. But the thing is, once that layer is fulfilled, how do we fulfill our highest goal? So here comes the media providing all sort of stereotypes that are ghosts, because they don't relate to our real life. If I'm here in Spain and I have specific circumstances that I have to overcome or I have to challenge that challenge me, what's the point if I see TV soap operas that come from Australia or from the United States that are completely in different conditions, where the prototypes or the archetypes of men and women are alien to me? But that doesn't mean that if I'm young and I'm a teenager, I'm gonna try to dress like them. I'm gonna try to have the aesthetics like them and all that stuff.
Do you believe there's the conspiracy that the overlords, the powers that be, work through the media to take the attention away from us? So we give it to the media and they commercialize it and they quantify it and they make money off of that as well. Do you believe this is some type of sinister thing, or maybe it was a little bit sinister at first and then everybody is just repeating the same thing that the overlords are doing now, and we're doing it to the micro level on the street to each other in that aspect? I'm not saying everybody is, but for the most part, that's what's happening in Western culture.
Yeah. I don't think that's any conspiracy. I think it's a fact that information overloads us with all those. Information is a weapon in the sense that the more you have easy answers for everything, the more you don't search for yourself. That's the basic weapon of information, because today information is like, there's a cult of information. This was something that one of the greatest, the most cultured men in the States, Theodore Roosevelt, said. He wrote a book called The Cult of Information, and time has shown that he was right, that basically information, it doesn't allow you to think, because it's an overdose of data, it's an overdose of facts. But the thing is, the more you are seduced, let's say you read the newspapers in the morning, or you watch TV news in the morning, then you have something to tell about the world to someone at your work or at the bar, at the pub. And then suddenly you have an easy answer for everything. You haven't done your homework, you've only read the information, and you've got the most smartest answers if someone asks you something about politics, about economics, about whatever. So information, it makes us very lazy, because it doesn't have this aspect to say, hey, have you tested what you're saying by yourself? Oh no, it's The Guardian, no, it's Washington Post. These are very prestigious. That's the beginning of how the powers that be that you're referring to say, okay, we need, in order to control the population, we have to have everyone agreeing with the frameworks we provide through the press. And even though this is self-degrading for them, they'll feel happy about it when they go and to the bars and to speak socially. And they, instead of, let's say someone, instead of saying, hey, how are you doing? How's your family? How's your daughter? How's your, no, did you see the last news in the other day? Interrupted, connection interrupted. Say, divide and conquer, strategy.
And when we look at those ideas and this divide and conquer type of thing, what are your thoughts in regards to people doing it to each other? I believe that it's now happening to each other. I have my own business here in the United States and California, and it's just the land of competition and this individualism as well that we live upon. It creates this competition where we're constantly judging each other, and it's all about materialism and the ego. And the internet amplifies that as well. So I believe in the past, we wouldn't have our eyes as much on what we have now on this information that you talk about, this cult of information. Of course, we had the TV, and it started with just a few channels. And then now you have hundreds of channels, and then you have the internet with millions of websites where you can get information from. So it's hard to manage yourself. I don't know where I'm going with this kind of question, but what do you believe in regards to all these people online now having a voice where they haven't done the research, and it adds to the misinformation, and it makes it hard to find good information, and then it also makes it frustrating for people like you and I that do the work and try to share good information? What are your thoughts in regards to everybody being allowed to share their information when it's not good information, or share their opinion when it's not a good opinion based on true knowledge?
Because we no longer have the circumstances. Unfortunately, if we don't create them ourselves, we don't have the circumstances to question the dogmas, to question all the answers that we are given when we are kids. And we just have to, we are just under the pressure of, if you want to succeed in academia, if you want to succeed in the university and in any institution, you don't ask questions. That's the main thing. You don't ask questions. You just accept the answers they give to you. So you just serve those these are providing the answers for their interests. That's the whole tactics. So that's exactly what's happening. And what you were saying at the beginning, that right now people are policing each other. People you thought they were friends, acquaintances, even your family. Now, because of all this crisis that we talked about in the last chat, now everybody like they're policing each other, because they have a narrative that they haven't questioned in their mind about all the coronavirus stuff. That right now they prefer to act against you because of their beliefs on the information than saying, hey, come on, you are my friend, and now I consider you evil because you are acting differently, let's say wearing a mask, for example, and you are doing that based on a series of assumptions that you haven't questioned. So basically, we are not given that space to say, okay, I'm evil. A friend I have for 20 years, I'm gonna make him a disposable unit of my life just because of what I've seen on TV, the information they provide in the news. So that's the sinister aspect. That's the sinister aspect. They're making between you and your friends a wall in which they produce that wall, and because they produce that wall, they divide you with your friends, with your society, with all your loved beings, and eventually they conquer you. They conquer the only thing you got, which is that power we have of saying, I want to produce my own knowledge, and then I don't care about all the information. Yeah, the information is good. You can, if you have knowledge, then information makes sense. But if you don't have knowledge, gnosis, information is going to control you. I see this on a daily basis. People who didn't have really worked for their own view of their life, their own knowledge, now they're totally surrendering to any kind of information, even if it's false, even if it's virtual, even if it's fake. They no longer see the difference between one, and they can't distinguish.
Yeah, pretty brilliant to put it to something we would put on our face to divide people. And then, of course, you have the vaccine as well, where people are demanding that people that don't have it get the vaccine and so forth. It's definitely crazy times that we're in right now. And that's why I call myself the Gnostic War. I believe there's a war of knowledge, and there has been for thousands of years, right? Knowledge is power. So it's hard to, what I've learned is I try to keep my friends list down, and what I look at online. I usually have a goal of what I want to do when I go online, and don't watch much TV, stuff like that. And I try to honor my family and my wife and my kids and spend time. And it's hard in this world. It's interesting that it really comes down to when I go places and I like go to the beach, or I go to a restaurant. And especially here in, the United States, there's people of all different types of racial heritages and backgrounds and traditions and religions and beliefs. But we'll go to a place, say the beach, and everybody's having a good time, and no one's fighting over these things that are in our head or that are talked about online or talked about by the media. But it seems like when it comes down to it, we all have these traditions and how we want to live life, and they're very simple. And all these ideas are what cause us to fight with one another. And what's interesting is it comes down to the ideas, and then online, and the people that I believe don't have the knowledge, haven't done the work, are the ones overlording to the people that I believe sometimes, most of the time, have the knowledge and maybe did the work, and they're ostracized. And this is a unique kind of situation. And it really puts the power in the powers that be's hands to have these people that lack gnosis, that lack knowledge, that haven't done the work, that don't have experiential knowledge, to give them the power. And it's scary.
Yes, it's like everything is accelerating since the last year in the sense of mind control, and mind control just from operating on fear. Because here, it's interesting where I live, that it was two or three months ago, we had the chance of going outside, going outdoors without the mask. It was just a law that was passed immediately. Nobody could even fine you because of that. But I was shocked to see when I say, oh, great, I'm not going to wear the mask. And this would imply studying why I don't, but that's another issue. But the thing is, I saw that people were asking for all the new normality and all the stuff, and practically 99% of the people still today, after 2 months, are still wearing the mask. But I've demonstrated I've demonstrated to myself, but I even talk to others about it. It's not about any questioning the virus. It's a matter of fear. It's a matter of fear. The more people wear masks, the more you have the pressure of wearing a mask. It has nothing to do with why. I'm referring to the context I'm living, because it was first mandatory to wear them, and then it wasn't. I think it was in July, so I decided to not wear them. So I was the only one outside practically wearing them. But you can see that what you were referring to, that people who have not done their, I don't like the word research, but that have contrasted what they read in the papers or in the internet with what they see firsthand. These people are those who are more, I would say, they surrender more to fear. And because of that, not only they need some authority, and that authority tends to be generally tyrannical, in the sense of, if you do not do this, you lose your job. If you do not do this, you lose your money, basically. And that's the card that's being played right now with these people. So that's why in this moment we have to face people who are completely ignorant of the situation in administration and many other sectors, but they're in absolute pressure to keep a mindset that, for whatever reasons, allows them to be paid. Yeah, because the more you generate fear in the population, the more you can divide them, the more you can control them, the more you can profit from them. So these are the kind of people we have to face right now on a daily basis. People who are policing us, who are saying, "Oh, you," as you said just a while ago, they seem to believe that they have some moral authority over us because they follow the information. Sorry, but that's wrong. That's not wrong. You're gonna get in a big problem because the only thing you can follow is knowledge.
Definitely. Yeah, and you had mentioned you didn't like the word research, and when I talk about research, for example, I wear a mask at work for my mold remediation business. I wore a mask today for about an hour and a half, and I have to take it off every certain amount of minutes, 15, 20 minutes. And that's actually an OSHA here. And there's the occupational, I forget what the acronym stands for, but they have they basically manage employees and so forth here in the United States. And the OSHA guidelines to wear a mask are every 20 minutes you have to take it off for 10 minutes, and it's mandatory for employees. And I've learned the hard way by wearing a mask and working in jobs and houses that were really bad, where I had it on for several hours and I almost passed out because of lack of oxygen. And then my body for the next day or two was just beat down and I couldn't hardly move. And I researched the mask. This was prior to all this mask debate and so forth several years ago. And I wanted to find out what was going on. And then my son also got sick and a few guys in the job. And I learned it wasn't the mold, but it was wearing the mask for too long, prolonged periods. So I did a lot of research into mask. I got certified, and then I learned about this and so forth. And to me, that's doing the research. That's experiential knowledge. I actually wear a mask. I and then
Exactly.
For several years now, so I know exactly, and I know that a P100 rated filter is the only thing that will filter any type of virus down to the micron of the coronavirus or mold and so forth. So you need to wear one of those masks in order to really filter whether in or out that, because it's going to go through your mask. Yes, it will stop some slobber and stuff like that, but in any event, that's what I believe is research. And I probably did about 2 or 3 weeks of research just on that subject, hours a day, probably about 50, 60 hours total. And to me, that I believe gives you a good understanding, and you have knowledge and authority to speak on a type of subject. What would you believe would give someone authority or knowledge on a specific subject? And I use the mask because that's a hot topic right now, and I do have empirical knowledge on that and so forth. What is your thoughts?
On the same line, I would say that last year I did my own research on all this stuff. I'm still doing it. Amazing research and extraordinary research, because I found people I respect in the field, great medical doctors, great scientists in the world, and at the same time I'm writing a book on a different view on medicine, so it also complements very well all this. But the starting point is basically that last year I've been taking care of my mom for a lot of time. She's got a lung disease, which is very severe, very chronic. So when all this stuff emerged last year of the coronavirus, I didn't really give it too much time because I was just focusing on so many other things, and I just thought, oh, this is just another media hype and stuff. But then eventually in January, at the end of January, here I had really very weird symptoms I never had in my life. I couldn't walk for more than 30 meters without lacking energy. It's not asphyxiating. My heart rate just couldn't keep up with my activity. And then I was feeling sort of very strange noises in my lungs that apparently could be pneumonia, but I never had a flu in years. How could I get pneumonia? And then eventually it all hit. This was the first week of February or so, when this was very gore stuff. I just spit a lot of blood. It was typical COVID, even when it wasn't declared as a pandemic here in Spain. Okay, So I was caring my mom. I'm still caring her. She's a survivor, a real survivor. And the thing is that I was just at that time saying, okay, if I want to care her, I need to know a lot about epidemiologics, all the stuff. I need to really study this, because if I truly have that incubation period that all epidemiologists, all the scientists in epidemiology know that you have when you are suffering from an infectious disease, I say, okay, I must take care right now. I have to understand to what point I can be close to my mom or not, and all this stuff. And it was interesting because I was a little careful to say, okay, they say it's 2-week period. Okay, so let's see. But the 2-week period already exhausted when I was already symptomatic. So this fact, which I verified by myself, practically contradicted 99% of the narrative that was being exposed at that time about the coronavirus, that it was a virus. Because if it was a virus, if this was specifically what they were talking about, how is it that when I was suffering from those symptoms, I did not produce no contagion in anyone around me when I suffered the symptoms? So I started thinking about that time, just think, let's see, this doesn't match. The information of my experience, the information of my experience, the information of my experience. And then, as I said, I just arrived to conclusions that are so extremely radical, but that everybody can verify by themselves. That's the most important thing. That now nobody wants to talk to me anymore, but my mom's still there. She's still alive and kicking, and I'm too. Yeah. So there's a price to pay, which is that no, you can't talk to practically nobody about these things or where things are deriving, what's the cause of all this crisis. It's just a matter of, let's say, what is your gnosis? You just perceive it in the insights or in the empathy that other person has, and then if you see they're tolerant to new views, then you progressively expose the views to them. But otherwise, it's just not good, because they're going to start policing you. But it doesn't matter. The important thing is the knowledge that you gain. Like you in the case of the masks, it helps at the level we live in, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, it helps protect me and my family. I know what to do. I try not to listen to other people, and I grew up with a punk rock attitude towards people, and I still have that. I watch a little bit what I say online, because it's just a shit fest of people fighting and so forth. So it's ridiculous. I believe that if you eat good, you sleep decently, you take some vitamins maybe, and you go outside in the sun, you get a little bit of exercise, that you could kick in just about anything. And it seems like a lot of people that do die are when they go to get health care, and then all of a sudden they're forced a tube down their throat, the ventilator. So that's something that's really interesting as well. My dad, he lived to be 85, and he drank and did several things that weren't good for his body. But one of the things that he didn't like to do was go to the hospital. There's another thing there. And he again lived to be 85. A lot of people die from going to the doctor. So that's interesting.
Yeah, the cases of the term is iatrogenesis, which is not much used today, but it's going on because it's just the toxics you gain by just even analyzing your symptoms. It's not even a treatment. This is a very dangerous thing. But as I say, it's very few of the people you can really talk about this today, because the social conditioning last year, because of the fear induction of the lockdowns and all the propaganda, not propaganda, but the fear really affected a lot of people last year. And today, those people who have not solved their fear through knowledge, it's just very difficult to talk to them, very difficult.
Yeah, Miguel, let's talk. I have this theory in regards to fear and how we're trained to think. If we look at it, it's almost as a lot of these people are automatons. You had an article, I know, on your Facebook page and on your website in regards to TV. Maybe it was just a quick little thing in regards to when we turn on the TV and entertainment, how we get into that hypnotic state. And, as far as myself, it's hard to get me. I like when I turn on the TV or I do something, I know exactly what I'm doing and who I'm turning on and the information that's being presented to me. It's this weird type of thing. Like I know, hey, I'm awake, but I'm going to go ahead and turn this on, this propaganda device, because you got to know what's going on, because they do reveal certain things, and you can develop, I believe, some way to predict what's going to happen in the future by looking at some of the propaganda as well. So I don't know where I was going with that, but what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, about the hypnosis of the media,
Yeah,
no?
sure,
Yeah,
the mind
exactly.
control.
It does. But I was hypnotized when I was a kid as well. And then when I was a teenager, I until I was 15 years old, I remember I was watching much more TV than reading books or anything. Why? Because basically I didn't have chances to experience me as an individual, to put me to the test, to an adventure, to say, okay, learn something, but learn it by yourself. I didn't have the time. And then the more I started to learn things by myself, the more I remember that the hypnotic aspect of TV no longer worked, in the sense that I couldn't even cope with let's say, the news, the kind of format they use, which is very temperamental, very, let's say, too intense in the sense of, I don't know, spectacularity, or making news, or making live. Yes,
Sensationalize,
exactly.
right?
To make it all if we're in a circus or something. So I just said, there was a point in my life, when I became more mature, I said, no, this is no longer for me. And then eventually, because of the necessity, let's say, of trying to understand myself through the language, through different languages, it wasn't no longer the media language, but it could say, logo. So let's say what other languages of the past had to say about this existential feeling of mine when I was, let's say, 24 years old. So then you start searching books. So then you go to a library and say, oh, let's see if books can help me. So you go along and you just go through the pages. I don't like it, don't like it, don't like it. There's something like a taste, like when you're changing channels. And at the end, we're looking for language that allows us to understand ourselves. And eventually we might find that probably the scholastics or the Gnostics, or I don't know, whoever in the past, or some other traditions, provide us a language that allows us to understand our experiential knowledge much better than many of the productions that are mostly provided to those individuals who still haven't had time to access their own experience, who still, unfortunately, or for whatever reason, did not have an adventure of themselves. So they're still looking for adventures to imitate on TV, or to serve as a reference. So we reached to a point where it seems that most people are just like living an advertisement. People going around many times, it's just how it is. And they're going for a party and whatever, and it seems, hey, you remind me of an actor. Oh, you remind me of this advertisement. It's following a pattern that was already provided by them, so they don't live the adventure of being themselves beyond those frameworks. And so I think it all starts, I always say the same, but it all starts in providing a space for the individual to experience whatever, but just experience it firsthand. That's the first thing. And from that point, maybe eventually we will turn off the TV. But now it's very sad to see all these enticements by the advertisement industry, so that young kids feel bad if they don't identify, let's say teenagers, with the standards that are promoted to them. So then, they feel bad at school if they don't have, I don't know, the PlayStation game, I don't know, the most fancy kind of.
Here it's LGBT flags and stuff like that, seriously, that they're pushing on kids on the TV shows, and then every advertisement that comes out. And that's just an example of non-traditional values that they're pushing. And you might have certain values that you have at home that you live by, and your kid, if they're going to turn on the TV or go on the internet or whatever it might be, they're constantly bombarded by different ideas and trying to entice our children and make our ideas not seem worthy and us seem weird. So that's kind of what I have a big problem with, and it's corrupting our youth, and it's getting to the point it's ridiculous. You had mentioned it really went hyper in the last year. I believe it all has. What do you believe is the end game for the powers that be with this shitfest that we have now with everything going on? Is it complete lockdown and vaccines, population control? What do you think's happening?
Yeah, first, it's just that we're reaching, if we look at specific traditions, even many, they all converge basically into one aspect in regard to the concept of time, and is that time is by cycles. It's not linear, it's not chronological, as generally we tend to believe in physics, or most physics. We tend to think that every second is the same as the next in terms of properties. So now we're living a very specific period, the 2020-2030 period, which was already pointed out in many traditions as a critical point for humanity. The Maya pointed out 2012 and all the stuff, but let's just put it, I would say it's just this 2012, 2040 period, which I've researched that myself, and it's a critical point for humanity. I think that right now, there are some, it's a change of a cycle in the whole cosmos, and it doesn't affect only human beings, but it affects all beings. It affects the whole planetary system. So in terms of creative outcomes, because this is something that even natural sciences hasn't really addressed properly, which is how can you deduce from a specific set of material properties the creative outcome that is capable of synthesizing all those properties? We have there's no understanding of that. There's never been. And it's precisely in these traditions where there's the idea that you don't have to understand it, but it will happen. There will be cycles of time, and there are critical points for humanity. Now, precisely because they're critical points for humanity, it tests humanity. It means all the best that we have inherited as a species is going to be put to the test right now. Knowledge, science, all art, everything shall be tested as a way of surviving this critical point. So, great for those who embrace humanity, but this isn't so good for those powers who, and I'm not saying individuals, I'm not saying, it's just a cycle, it's a structure that says, okay, fantastic, but this is a conflict, because if they really demonstrate how powerful the human species is during this critical point, our capacity for control is menaced, which is the way of avoiding that conflict in the end times, and especially in the end of the cycle. It's basically, let's say, okay, we can increase our chances to control our power, that's the whole thing, if we reduce humanity to slaves, controlled slaves, by whatever means. And it can be through the media just administering their fear, just like saying, okay, you don't want to solve your fear, we're going to give you all type of justifications, so you don't have to face the problem. So you feel good about yourself. You're fearful, but you're going to feel good about yourself. And we're going to transmit that through the news, through the media, all the stuff. And so you don't work about yourself. Good. You're not a challenge anymore. You're not a menace for us. So basically what's going on right now is the more the human being becomes passive, accepts everything, doesn't question everything, doesn't want to live a life that is purely human, the more that person, and I mean a life that's purely human, that's creative, a life that's not based on, oh, I'm going to do what someone says, or I'm going to say, or I'm going to do what everybody does. That's very purely mechanistic. That's not human. So the more people think that way, the more the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the more they have the better stakes for when the moment really comes. So right now, all this issue of inducing people to, as happened here in Spain, say, oh no, you can't go to a pub unless you are vaccinated and stuff. Here in Spain, these were illegitimate measures because they were anti-constitutional. This was just a resolution that happened here in Spain a couple of weeks ago. But there's all these powers that really want to manipulate people through their fears. Oh, I'm not going to be able to do what I used to do. I'm not going to be able to get to my normality. So they deny the basic aspects, the humanity of the individuals. They deny them to control them. And that's the ace on the sleeve, let's put it this way. So I see, when I talk about this, I don't like to refer to elites in the sense of what most people say, oh, the Bilderberg and the globalists. No, it's an atmosphere. You can, in any way you go, just around you, your neighbors, everywhere, you can notice there's this conspiracy of your own people, or even of your own family. Like I say, we don't have to talk about globalists. It's just happening. It's an atmosphere. It's the power of time affecting every single thing happening right now, every single thing.
So you believe this was just, they understand the cycles of time, and this is a clampdown,
Yes.
and they're accelerating their tools that they have, and of course, from the mask to the non-working, using laws, of course, to basically accelerate this. So is it the United Nations? Is it who is it behind everything, making these decisions to make it happen?
I think it's not, I don't know. I think humans aren't so, in general, if you look, for example, the texts that come out of, or if you read the texts that come out of these great institutions, they're very ordinary, really. They're just propaganda. They're not, I don't see any great mind behind these institutions. I've never perceived it. But they're in positions where they have power, where they have capacity to exert that power. And then there is some force which is overall using that for this is my hypothesis, because I can't demonstrate it, of course, but it's just so sophisticated on one hand, and on the other hand, you see their texts that are so ordinary on the other
Sure.
hand, that you say this is not human. This is something that is controlling their actions, but that is demonic.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring that back to so we've been talking about the automaton concept, and if we look back through time and we look back to even the biblical traditions, back to the Old Testament and the Hebrews, they had the concepts of Behemoth and Leviathan, I believe, was the sea monster, this force, this hive mind force, and then on land it was Behemoth, and people that were controlled by this force. They were like, they had the mind of the flesh. So this force would control them, and they would become beast, and they sinned, and they were of the flesh. And if we look at that to today, it's really the same thing. These people are after their own destiny, their egos, the flesh, materiality, sex, money, whatever it might be, a title, things that can go along with the same type of thing. And you talk about there's no ideas. It's as if participating in the higher mind, the new sphere or what it might be. So they're not connecting to maybe the Christian concept of the holy fire, the mind of God, and so forth. So you have these people, and then also in the New Testament, they talk about the mind of the flesh. And these people have these carnal desires. And that's what I see the difference between, say, people like you and me. We're connected via the higher mind, these ideas. That's why we're drawn to each other. We want to talk about them. We're interested in, and I see this connection with other people that I have on my podcast. And the other people I'm literally repelled against. I'm magnetized to you, Miguel, right? But the other people I'm just completely repelled against. And of course, there's different levels of that depravity, of that carnality. And I actually came from that. I believe I was trained to Behemoth, to be a beast through our media, through everything. My father was an alcoholic, and he was miserable at work, and he was controlled. And now that I know what happened to him, he was completely under mind control, and he didn't have time for me, and he would just turn on the TV and drink himself because he was miserable, I believe, because of the system, but he didn't understand it. So there's this concept that goes back that I believe deals with what you're talking about, this force that can go to different levels. And I've seen people, and they're almost schizophrenic, and they operate from these emotions. So I've been trying to understand what this force was. And what I've learned is humans have two brains, right? We have the brain up here in our skulls, and then we also have a second brain that works through our GI tracts and so forth. And what I found out, it's actually connected, Miguel, to the Earth's biomagnetic sphere. So we have this Earth's magnetic biosphere, and I believe it's connected through our gut and through this force that you talk about. So if you're constantly living by your flesh, I believe that's connected to our second brain and to the earth type of thing. And I believe this is also played out in Satanism and Gnosticism and Christianity, how in Christianity, you're supposed to live by the light and by God and the holy fire and to be Christ-like and to be good and treat people how you want to be treated. And then the satanic, they take the ancient pentagram and they invert it, where nature is over spirit, where it's about the individual. And this was really hammered into our system in the 1960s. And I believe through the Church of Satan and the liberal type of thing, that these traditions were pushed out because the powers that be believed that creating beast was an easier type of thing to manage, and we destroy ourselves. So that's what I see happening, is we become beast when we live by our flesh, and that can be taken to different realms, as you say, to the demonic. And I believe this could be tied to the traditions back to the behemoth, Leviathan, and of course that became the devil in Christian, the concept of the devil. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, first, in the European traditions, what we have always constantly is the fight against the dragon is a very mythological archetype, which represents basically forces that are not human, but that kind of like act as burdening anything that's human. And they're not visible, but you can see them by their fruits in the action of individuals and how they act. So it's an invisible force, but acts collectively. And we're supposed to be in the end of Kali Yuga, which is the age basically of the demonic forces of these kind of collective powers, which entice the fear of people to not solve it, are greater than ever. Now, this is an abstraction, of course. This is something we can, for people who are not who don't have the experience, it's not even mythological. It's just an abstraction. It's something that can appear in stories and Disneyland and whatever. But the thing is, there's a point when we observe that people are dominated when it comes to action and decision and responsibility. You can go to a pub and say, oh, it's all very fine, we're all so cool and all so great. But then when there's an attack on ourselves through whatever power, corporate, state, or government, you can see there's a positioning. And that positioning is just always the same. Those who don't want to face the fire want to find control upon themselves, upon the others. And those who say, okay, but I know my knowledge, I know my experience, that's the only thing I can trust. Those stay, those are the ones to be controlled. So there's a kind of separation there between black and white, like in the chess. And then suddenly, what you notice is that those people who you thought that they had an education, conscience, or whatever, suddenly they seem like strangers. Yeah. So this is it's always the same story. The demonic forces of an age, they're total. They act everywhere. It's not, and the more the only salvation we have against those forces is to have space for ourselves and for our own experience, because that's what makes us human. For example, if you look at animals in general, yeah, you can say they have their experiences, of course, but let's say, for example, a goat has more or less the same experiences as other goats. The territory is more or less the same, adapting to their conditions. And then you have, I don't know, an eagle, or you have a sheep. They all have more or less the same experiences because they can't survive unless they have an environment that's adapted to their conditions. But humans, in the history of humans, we've adapted to all kinds of environments, and that's what makes us human. I mean, there's humans everywhere in the world, even in the most difficult conditions, environmental conditions. So that's what makes us human, and that's what is trying to be co-opted. No, you're just like an animal. You're just like a sheep, so you can be controlled. You're not human anymore.
Yeah, I find it interesting, like in the past, you talked about a goat or a sheep, or you have the human. Maybe in the past, we didn't have as many of our own ideas. I think of maybe back to the tribes, and when we were all part of our same tribe, when we were all related, essentially. And you go to a lot of different countries, and it's really like that. There are people there that are composed of one race, or there might be 2 or 3 races that are intermingled with them, and they have a lot of division between those different races and so forth. And you have a lot of groupthink and collectivism as well, and tradition is something that's very important to them. So what do you believe about that? Do you believe it was the Western culture of individualism that created the Western mind, where we're all in our own reality tunnel? I have this thing that I like to say is, you can go to any room of, say, 12 or 15 people, and each person is going to be having a different experience or something that he's going through. Maybe one's contemplating suicide, one's getting married the next day, and everybody has these different political affiliations, but we're all people when it comes down to it. So what are your thoughts there in regards to, you have the good thing with individualism or liberty, say, where we can pursue our own happiness, but it also creates a lot of isolation and loneliness for people as well.
Yes, in the European traditions, which are those which I feel more familiar with, there is the idea always that in all of the traditions all around Europe, which is I've studied and I feel familiar with it naturally, is that knowledge doesn't belong to us. We just, as individuals, we can only aspire towards it. And even, let's put it in these words, update it in the conditions of our time. But it's not ours as individuals. So that goes against most of the ideas of the power of the individual to generate their arbitrary form of knowledge based on, let's say, opinion. And most of the traditions encourage, through myth and through legend, the individual to say, okay, you're just a part of something much greater than you. So here are the steps, and at the end there's a mystery, because the knowledge that is the light, let's say in the 16th century, for those conditions of the humans in the 16th century, is not the same, let's say, as those in the 20th century. So the light is the same, it's just that the spectrum differs depending on the conditions of the time. But for humans, for the human power, the human spirit always has the chance to access that source of knowledge in any time. It doesn't mean that the expression shall be the same, but has that access, and that access is not human. That knowledge is not human. That knowledge is I don't know, it's like mathematics. Many mathematical structures or topologies, they work for nature, they work for understanding nature, but nature is something that transcends most of our understandings of how things work in general in our lives. Many topologies, many fractal structures, we see them in nature, but we can't apply them in our lives. So they're greater than. So it's like this feeling of awe towards something that's greater than you, that can make you approach that knowledge. But first we have to gain that initiation, that, I don't know, that awe of being in a universe that's much greater than us. Now, what's happening today? This is very rare, because today everything is like saying, no, you have an explanation for everything. Something happens to you today, oh, you look in the internet, boom, 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 you got an influencer, you've got a how-to YouTuber or something like that. Oh, now I know what's going on. So easy, so easy. So that way knowledge can't be accessed, gnosis, knowledge, it can't be accessed. And we're just so self-satisfied that we're so smart because we know how to Google things, that at the end, that's the best state of mind, so that all these powers that are taking advantage of their capacity to control the media say, okay, so these people are surrender so much to information. What a prey. Got the best prey in the history. We can do with them whatever we want, you know. So I think that's a bit the situation. But
so let's talk about, you mentioned that these ideas transcend us. It's something outside of us. That would go with the concept of the noosphere and this mind that's outside of us, that's not really part of my skull, but I'm participating in it, and it's going out there. And what I've researched through history, I say that word again, research, but when I look back trying to understand what is this mind that we're participating in, it basically is this concept of these ideas that transcend time and these philosophies. So if you look back, it seems as if the bad ideas go into a type of vacuum or decay where, yeah, we all could say our ideas and we could share this knowledge or whatever we might have, but through this natural vacuum of life and ideas and knowledge and people accepting them, the bad ideas seem to eventually get shaved off and decay and go into some type of trash bucket, and I don't know, some natural trash bucket. And then the good ideas seem to stay, and people like you and I like to participate in that and to add to it and to honor as well as the traditions of the past. So when I find out, when I look to something to learn something, I look back to see what the philosophers said in Rome and in Greece, and then also what the biblical philosophers said. And I try to get a concept and an overall view of a subject, and it really gives me a good understanding of it. And it seems as if you take that route and you go back, a lot of them have similar ideas, and they accept the people that went from before them, from Plato and Aristotle, and then you have the church fathers talking and quoting those gentlemen as well. So these ideas seem to transcend time that you're talking about. Would you say this is part of what God wants? Maybe the theological type of mind, the God mind and Christ, or the noosphere, and then the other people are possibly participating in something it's not a part of the higher mind, it's the lower mind that I talk about, and they could do whatever they want, but a lot of those ideas and these things, they're not gonna last.
Well, for example, let's consider first that probably the human being as a organic structure is probably the most complex and the most perfect that exists today in the planet as a living being, I refer to as a species. Without getting into evolution, I think that's basically a fact. We've developed as humans in history things that are impossible for other species. Now, the thing is, also now, if we combine this with the fact that nature tends to use all the specifics of all species to create an ecosystem, in the sense of taking advantage of the best of each species to create, for example, a forest, because a forest is not produced, or a jungle, by species that are not faithful to their specific unique quality. They all have to be the best with the specificity, and that is taken advantage. The whole system, the whole ecosystem uses that for evolutionary process that makes it more and more beautiful, more and more fantastic. We can call that godly process of progressively generating richness and stuff. So right now, if we consider that the human species is the most advanced in the whole planet, and whether they talk about artificial intelligence, that's a completely different thing. But as a species, we're the most advanced. That doesn't mean that we like all other species. We might love eagles, wolves, and other stuff, but we're the most advanced. But in the moment, we no longer use that which made us humans, which is our intellect, which is our capacity for knowledge, which is that what makes us interact with each other, to share that knowledge and to increase that knowledge, to make it more richer. In that moment, we're no longer humans anymore. That moment, we go to the recycle bin, as you said. Because we have to be faithful to the best we got as a creation of something greater than ourselves, as all animals do. And yes, there are many ideas that just can't be recycled into our times because they were just lacking that basis. Like, for example, there are so many scientific studies that are really worthless that are done today because they lack the human aspect of it. To say, okay, this is very sophisticated, all those equations, all the statistics. Okay, but what's the conclusion? What you expect in a good study is, which is the human conclusion. That's what makes a scientific study excellent, saying, okay, we've did all this grassroots science, we did all this research, we've done all this statistics, all this mathematics, all this physics and stuff. What's the conclusion? It has to be a human conclusion. Don't come up and say, okay, we still have to do some research and we have to resort to other simulators and stuff. Oh, it's just depressing.
Yeah, but that keeps them employed and right.
Exactly.
You talked about, again, the cycle, and if we look at the end of a lot of cycles in different societies and cultures, especially here in the West, they seem to end in revolution when it comes to recent cycles. As an example, we had the French Revolution and what happened here in the United States, and now we have them rising up in France and different areas trying to, well, protest these lockdowns and these vaccines and these mandates and so forth. Do you see that eventually it's going to get bad, but the people will push back and there will be a type of revolution? Or do you believe that all those revolutions are more engineered by the people behind the curtains, the powers that be, or whatever you might want to call them?
Yes, I think that modern revolutions are generally, I would call them more revolts, in the sense that the state doesn't change. Governments, the state, in the sense not of governments, but the powers that operate in the whole of society, they're getting stronger and stronger every time. We've got this recent case of how this coronavirus thing, it was just operated at a global level. And it was probably the most powerfully engineered state operation at a systemic level that we've seen by now. So I think that my vision, or my correlation that I see in history, is that the more the masses protest in the streets as masses, as people who follow an ideology, the more fortified is the power of the governments. This happened already in the French Revolution. So since then, it's always been practically like that. It's a sign. I think it's a sign of the times. And I think people must manifest, of course, their expression, because that's the whole point of being human. You express the absolutely unique creative aspect of the human being, which is not present in many animals in their territory. Animals have a fixed instincts. We don't. We are more changeable through generations. So we must express ourselves. We must express authentically who we are and what we think about our experience and the knowledge we gain. Now, the problem of protests, I know this goes against another thing I'm going to say, is that we have to be very careful if they're not fulfilling an ideological agenda. This is the most important thing to say, okay, what are we truly defending here? For example, in France, recently they were defending basically if we look, it was about the COVID passports, basically against Macron and all stuff. But if we track down, it's basically about economic liberalism. You can't stop me from moving here, from doing this, from doing that, because that goes against all the laws of liberal economy. So basically, if we look down, it's not truly about vaccination and stuff, because if it was really about that, people would go another direction, because they would study really what all this thing is about. But that's another issue. But the thing is, really, it's about the destruction to the economy and the destruction to their lives.
So those people, you believe, were more upset with, hey, I can't go to the pub, I can't go to the restaurant, and you're going to make me do this, and gotcha.
Yes.
So their way of life. I've seen that here in the United States too, people just getting the vaccine because they want to travel and etc.
So this is the problem I see, that using the term passport vaccines for a protest, what you're really doing is strengthening the ideological agenda that manipulates all this stuff. But if you go and just forget all that stuff and say, yeah, we just want to go to the park, we just want to go to that, it's more honest, it's more authentic. But the more you use those slogans, the more I think it's just playing their game, I think. But I can't, I'm pretty much alone in these visions.
So you say behind the actual reason is to starve the slave or the citizens or the country, the people that are doing businesses, because you see what's happening in the long run. The businesses are suffering, and then the landlords and the people that own the real estate, which are essentially the same people, the middle class and the upper class. You have all these people, no one's paying rent, and then is the same thing happening there where you're at? And,
yes.
And then how are people making money? Because it seems like a lot of people have money. Are they all on unemployment there as well?
Here, there's now in the season of a bit of a recovery because of tourism, and the restrictions have been overcome in Spain, and also because of the vaccination, people feel more encouraged to consume all this stuff. But there has been protests as well, and there's going to be more protests in the streets. But the thing is, deep down, what do people really want? People, what they want is just, in general, like everyone else, to live their life, and I think that should be the slogan of a protest. Let's say, hey, we want to live our life. But the problem is that then, for some reason, these protests are co-opted by whatever political groups, and they say it's because of the COVID passport, So what you're doing basically is giving more power to the narrative that is making even more fear in the media than saying, no, we don't even know what COVID is. We don't even know. We're just normal people. Most of us, apparently just 1% of us might have suffered COVID, so according to the statistics. But what they want is just life to continue. So that would be a great slogan. Hey, don't take our life away. But there's the problem. I see that eventually the powers, the technocrats, know how to manipulate masses. They know it very well. Since the 1940s, 1930s in Nazi Germany, they know practically everything about that, how to do it.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because the thought that came to my head were there's a lot of memes being shared between what's happening in Australia, and they'll show a picture of the Australian police asking someone for their COVID passport, their papers, and then they're putting it right next to the photograph of someone in Nazi Germany being asked for their papers. And it's similar. So do you believe the end stage lockdown is to control movement and travel like this happening in Australia? Because it seems as if they're going back and forth on what they're saying, but then we're having whole countries being locked down like Australia and New Zealand. What's going to happen in Spain and the United States and the other countries? So this is a global type of agenda, but we all are on different programs, but it seems to be the same program.
Yeah. And it's always the same. It's like we have a problem as a society, and we need to find a scapegoat. And we haven't found it by ourselves for the reasons we've been talking before, because we can't organize. We have lost this contact, this human contact, communities with each other, so we can't really understand the causes together of what's happening. So what's happened, we're just so anxious, so stressed out, that eventually we say, oh, they're giving us the COVID. Oh, it's all about COVID. It's all about these powers that be have already provided us the scapegoat. So it doesn't matter. We just complain about that, and we from the streets, and then we forget about all the real fundamental things that really have been affecting us. Not now, not in the last 2 years, but for a long time already.
And if we look back over history, I don't know if you've looked into travel and how people were allowed to maybe leave their homeland. From what I have read is that we weren't. A lot of us were pretty much stayed where we're at unless we were part of some type of expedition going out for the king or whatever it might be. But for the most part, when you lived in a type of kingdom, you had to get a pass to pass from one county to the next. So this phenomenon of being able to travel and get on a plane and go to whatever country you want to, from my understanding, is new. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, totally. But compared to those times you're referring to, there was the slow transition from one place to another, which you had to have some contact with the culture that you don't gain as a tourist. I can go to Paris and I say, oh, but another thing is to stay there 1 year, work there, if you can work there. So that's a slow transition, but you assimilate something of the culture, which is you never regret. But today it's all so fast in the touristic, yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's a good thing. So I see sometimes there's good things that are coming out of this, because I believe the superficial, just because I have money and I can go wherever I want and pay and go and have a superficial experience and say, hey, I went to Paris or I went here and la la la. But to actually go to some place and have a connection at maybe Spain, and I knew Miguel and I was like, hey, Miguel, and we became friends. And eventually I traveled to Spain and I knew I was going to see you and you were going to take me around town, but I was going to have my own villa to stay in and you could help arrange that and so forth. But now we just go and money buys everything. And at the same point, it's destroying the world. So there's things that I see that are good and then also bad. Do you believe it's going back to maybe where we're going to have that to travel eventually, and we're not going to be traveling wherever we want, and us citizens, us plebs, us whatever you might want to call us, won't have these freedoms, because they say once they start taking these freedoms, they never give them?
I don't know exactly. I haven't traveled practically nothing lately, but I don't know to what extent it's really so difficult to travel around the world, even if you didn't get a PCR or this vaccine passport, because it's still here in Spain. It's still not legislated completely. It's just things that they're saying, oh, eventually it will be passed, the law and everything, but it's never being truly passed, because there are all these different variants and all this stuff that they're always updating constantly. They never can really fix the legislation in Spain. So it's all very contingent. It's all very state of uncertain circumstances right now, of very short-term decisions. In fact, last year, the state of alarm that was declared here in Spain because of the lockdown was declared this year by the constitutional, well, it's called Tribunal Constitucional. It's the maximum Supreme Court, you can say, here in Spain. It was declared illegal, and all the fees, all the fines, everything that was charged, that had to be turned back to the people who supposedly were committing illegal acts during that time. So it's like now we're living in this time where there is this urge on the part of many economic sectors of locking us down because for the reason that we were talking about, it deprives people of this which makes them fearful, which is, oh, I have to stay at home. I can cope with myself. I have to stay here in holidays. Oh, I'm gonna get completely anxious or stressed out or whatever. And that is all derived here in Spain, I refer to, by economic sectors that have the liberal interest in those maneuvers. But the thing is that at the government level and even at the European level, it can easily be declared illegal. Just in 1 month, 2 months, as soon as all these, because here in Spain, for example, it goes against some of the basic rights that are declared in the Spanish Constitution of 1978, which is about you can freely move from one place to another without having to give any kind of argument based on aspects that are not in the legal code, the legal penal code in Spain, or even in other treaties of the European Union. But all these things have been so quickly transgressed in the last month that, yeah, there's a kind of uncertainty of what we can resort to at government level or even at the level of law to cope with this. So I think this is also creating a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress because of the uncertainty of the situation, and say, what can we depend on to keep on living our lives without always having to prove something that makes no sense and never made any sense, as in this, well, in a sense of, for example, just to give you an easy example, these COVID passports, nobody will ever guarantee you, no medical doctor will say this doesn't avoid you to keep on spreading the virus. It only mitigates the symptoms. Okay, so let's say I go from Spain to Ireland or to Austria or to Germany. No medical doctor in the world will say, oh, you're still spreading the virus, but don't worry, because if you have the COVID, it will be less severe. Even if you die, it will be a less severe death. Oh, good. Now, this is something purely verified by all medical doctors and all the laboratory industries. Now, how can you make that something that has legal value? You can't, in practice. So there's so many contradictions. Yeah.
And we're going on almost, 2 years now, 18 months of it. So it seems to be the new normal. As I mentioned, the thing that I've learned is that when they do something, they don't seem to give it back. And we're seeing the travel thing, which they locked down travel, and then now it's being opened, and then people are being mandated vaccines. So anyways, so what do you have going on right now with yourself? Are you doing anything special in regards to your philosophy, your ideas? Do you have any books in the process? What are you up to?
Yeah, this year I'm not sure I'm gonna come up with new books because I'm working on 4 at the same time, not finished yet. One is the most challenging for me, is precisely trying to cope with all these recent circumstances at the health level, and I was trying to find, based on my 4 operative tradition series, I was thinking about going back to an operative view of medicine, which is very challenging in the sense of how a doctor can have first direct access to the patient without technological mediation and really effectuate a true healing, as it was done in the old days, and it's still done somehow around today, without so much technological mediation. And it's really challenging, but fortunately, because I addressed this issue, I had the privilege of accessing great medical doctors in the world that can assist me in writing the book.
And can I add something there? You made me think something. Sorry to interrupt you, Miguel. When I looked back at the past, and then I had my son who was really ill, and I helped bring him back. And I know you went through your illness, and then you're taking care of your mother. When I look back at the old medical textbooks, what I learned is that the doctors didn't see dozens of patients. They might have had a few patients they might see a day, or what it might be, or 1 or 2, and it wasn't as if they had hundreds and hundreds of patients. They tended to them, and they lived local by. So there was house visits. So I think that, to me, is the future, if we're ever to go back to real medicine, is more of a connection with the family and the house, because that's where I believe doctors could find out by going to the neighborhood, going to the house, and spending more time with the patient. What do you feel?
Yes, the main challenge I have in this text, which is to define a concept of health, because we're very focused lately in sickness and disease. I think it's good to redefine health, to see our life from a health viewpoint. And the thing is, it's not necessarily about, I'm just getting to this progressive conclusion that it's not necessarily about feeling good or not rejecting pain or not being sick, all the stuff. This is quite recent in history. It's more about, do we have the condition to find in our life as a humans meaning? There can be some contradictions in our lives, conditions, heritage, that make us manifest an illness, also in relation to the territory, which is we are not adapted to, for example, for whatever reason, and then that kind of deprives us for the chance of making meaning of our life in relation to our family circumstances in life, to territorial circumstances, to the technology that we have around. So if I look back, and basically the best medical doctors, they were really not necessarily, how would I say, the shamans in the past, which would, you can say, the primordial archetype of the medical doctor, just applied to more ancient societies. The idea wasn't necessarily to heal pain, but to provide a framework or a worldview that could assist the patient to understand the position of that patient in connection to the whole cosmos. And what could connect, what could heal is, hey, you've lost the path, but look, that's your path. And I'm going to give you the framework so you can go through there. But it's all an understanding. The shaman is, of course, they have all kind of chemical, biochemical substances that assist in the journey. But basically, it's all about providing a cosmology to the patient. And that's what heals. It's what allows the patient to follow the destiny that might have lost that for some time. And then it doesn't mean you're going to live longer, but it means you're going to live in a more powerful direction. So for me, this was the crucial point to recover that. But because of all the changes that have happened recently in all the medical system, not recently, but very recently, in how all this thing has, I was just considering, like, saying, well, I don't know if I should make this Operative Traditions 5 or just make it completely another new book and a completely new subject and progressively introduce these ideas. So I'm still pondering that. That's one of the books. And then I started to, I have other 2 books on technology again. There's another book I want to write. There's 2 screenwriting. I'm getting into screenwriting now. It's just a new adventure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is that for your own like documentary? Are you going to try to do your own video documentary yourself, or are you?
Oh, no, it's yeah. That's
well,
gotcha.
Basically
it's for film. I like screenplays. I'm starting to get into screenplays, and
nice.
the whole thing of how to do all the format and stuff, and all the narrative and things, and how to present ideas and so many scenes and stuff. I'm still getting familiar with it. But the thing is, I've already dealt with some people, yes, in Hollywood precisely, that are giving me some guidance on in which direction I have to go. So to do it properly and with some substance. And then there's another couple of books which I want to write. Yes. Also, I was thinking about a book on this football star, Diego Maradona, about a graphological, I don't know if you see this, a graphological study of his handwriting, a study of his personality through his handwriting. Through this, because I'm a fan of handwriting study. I like to do handwriting studies to a lot of people. And yeah, several things. And what else? And then I have, next in September, I have a Guinness World Records attempt here in here where I live. It's a push-up challenge. I hope to break the world record, and that's just something more physical.
Nice.
Yeah.
So how many push-ups do you have to do a day to prepare for that, and what are you doing right now?
Let's say I train more in quality than quantity, in the sense of, let's say I want to do 30 for the record. I never do, I try to do 5 quality push-ups, then more, and just breathe properly, very important. It's not to focus basically in withstanding the tension, trying to perceive if there is more tension than pain, that's good. But if there's more pain than tension, it's good to stop. Yeah. But it's just a very recent, right now I'm just changing a bit because it's summer and it's easier to train in some aspects, but I've been training for a long time, so it's for many years. So
Yeah, is it the amount of push-ups in 24 hours type of thing? Is that
No,
what it is now?
it's called it's a new modality which I had to really, it challenged me to make Guinness World Records accept it, because it's one hand push-ups, and you have to keep the feet together, and you have to go down, and the chest has to touch the ground in each repetition, and the feet must be together. It's really,
That's hard.
so, yeah.
What's the record?
Nobody knows.
Gotcha.
That's why it's a new modality, and I don't know how many I can do right now. More than 30, I think I can, but I'm not sure because I never exhaust myself. But nobody knows. I know that the great trainers in the world who say it's really hard. I don't know.
I don't think I could do one.
It was a very interesting experience because, in the sense, I discovered it one day. It was very surprising how it occurred. So then I said, "Oh, so I do so many repetitions. This must." Hey,
So you mean you discovered it one day, meaning you had the talent to do it and you were able to, like your first try, or kind of thing out of that?
It was basically, it's interesting because it's like the last drop, that when you fill a glass, it's like boom, you're filling the glass for so many years, you don't notice, and then suddenly there's this drop that manifests all the work you've done for so many years, and I wasn't aware of it, but the work was there. So and I didn't expect it. It's this very interesting thing about and in this book of health, I want to also address many aspects of physical exercise in terms mostly of this concept of aesthetics, which is today's sport. Sport is it's an activity that has been driven towards competitiveness at all levels, and the thing that deep down the Olympic ideal is not necessarily that doesn't go in that direction, but it's more about you practice sport because it allows you to do an activity like talking, like expressing yourself to others and sharing information, listening to others. You don't gain anything from it. It's not economic. It doesn't produce anything, but it's precisely in those moments when you face yourself to situations where you're wasting your time and you're not gaining anything, that you can really find that challenge between your ego and yourself. And that was the whole point of the practice of the Olympic spirit, which is to find a circumstance, any kind of situation where you won't win anything and you've practically lost in advance, but it's the character you present there which shows the traits of your growth towards your personality. So it was a medium for personal development of the highest kind. So I think most of this has been forgotten, but
that's the spirit of the Olympian, right?
Mm-hmm.
The true spirit.
Yes, and that's why it's like, for example, it's not whatever we do it for its own. If we are capable of doing it for its own sake, that's already the starting point for a path of victory, because it's what you gain. You don't gain anything, but you're fighting against the ego. For example, there are many people who, let's say, go to do sports and suddenly they don't win, and you can see the ego act immediately, and they get depressed, or they get this or that, or they just, and then you got others who win, and then also the ego takes over when they win. Now suddenly they're happier people, and the Olympic spirit say, okay, I win, great. I lose, great, good. Yeah. But easy to say, but so hard to do.
Yeah, and you talked about it, how it's a competition against one another, but when it really comes down to it, it's a competition against ourselves, against the ego and character development. And we lose a lot of that, of course, today, and people aren't about that, or they put too much value in the sport rather than in the character and being a good role model and being someone who develops their philosophy as well and so forth and does things. That's great. So what can you direct people? Where's the best place for people to find your great work?
It's my website. It's www.thesolarwarrior.com, and there's basically an introduction to the books and some posts. They're also present there. But it's good if they have access to in the about the author section, so they get to Facebook, because generally most of the posts I publish go through Facebook, most of them as social media technique.
Yeah, I follow you on Facebook as well. And what do you feel people will get from your books if you're to share these ideas into the newsphere, to the world? What is the main idea that you're trying to get through? I know, of course, there's several, and you have operative traditions. What are they going to learn from you?
First, you got the first trilogy, which is the Warrior Trilogy. It's 3 books, 3 essays, and basically that's all about an archetype of how we, as our heroic tendency of how the human has challenged the ego, has changed according to historical circumstances, and there were several phases in which that ideal was lost, and it's important to see how it was incarnated in different historical phases, let's say the Middle Ages, Roman times, the Celtic period as well, and now basically which are the chances in modern times to reenact that power of challenging the ego in today's circumstances. Then I have operative traditions, which is mostly about how to create with first-hand experience at all levels. For example, the first volume is basically about understanding our relation to technique, which is one of the most misunderstood topics in our time, because technique, we tend to confuse it with technology, but technique is a handling, it's a skill, and it's crucial for first-hand experience. Then the second volume is basically it's more philosophical about how to employ this to challenge nihilism, which is basically it's a modern kind of disease of thinking that life hasn't any meaning apart from what comes from outer sources, and how to challenge that in connection to the powers of the earth. Then in the third volume, it's a rediscovery of medieval science and of Gnostic science, and even science that we can relate on a daily basis without getting into a laboratory, and that we can learn many things about science at that level. And then the fourth volume is more about architecture. That architecture is not just buildings, it's not just decoration, but it's a structure of power that impregnates us, even at the levels of the state. Let's say even telecommunication technologies or satellites. That's the kind of the building we're living right now, and it allows people to say, I can't believe that I'm separated from this because I'm part of it, and I have to know how it works, so I know how I work and what I'm doing. So those are basically the ideas, which it's not easy for someone who has a very ideological view of things to capture these ideas, because basically all these books try to destroy ideology in all its forms. The fact that we think, for example, that the ideology is like saying, okay, I'm going to think something so that it belongs to the level of everyone else. So my books basically go countercurrent to that. So it's they're anti-ideological, and that's why some people find it so difficult to find anything interesting in them, because people are trying to find many times their ideologies in literature, but I don't give them that chance.
Definitely. No, that's a great description, Miguel, and I appreciate your time, the knowledge that you shared with the audience, and I wish you well upon your journey, and I wish you the best.
The same to you. The same to you.
Thank you, Miguel. Take care.
Okay. Take care.